So we are at the beginning of chapter 3, and we explained that there's a relationship between Sukkot and Chanukah, and both of them have the element of the setting or the dimming of the sun. And we started to explain that the sun, and the sun specifically in the context that we've been using it here, is the word chama. Chama means heat. Heat, of course, is the result of the sun. It's not the essence of the sun itself. And that's going to be an important idea that we're going to explore. And the idea is to be able to turn down, to dim the heat, and the heat being a reference to pleasures in the world. Basically the Greeks were involved with hedonism, and we're going to explore their mindset and their philosophy. They were involved with purely rational thought, pure logic. That's where they were coming from. And so we want to understand that. So let's start chapter 3. Let's clarify this further. The verse in Tehillim states, "For the sun and its shield is Havaya Elokim. Ki shemesh umagen yud kei vav kei Elokim." This is an important pasuk because the idea is brought down throughout Kabbalah and throughout Chassidus that the sun and its shield, each one refers to one part of that equation. The sun refers to Yud Kei Vav Kei, and the shield refers to Elokim, the name Elokim. What does that mean? So I'll explain it outwards, and then afterwards we'll go back inside. And the idea is that, of course, the sun, its intensity is such that if there was nothing between ourselves and the sun, of course, the radioactivity, the heat, the intensity of it would simply not allow us to be able to exist. The incredible thing about our planet is its perfect distance between us and the sun, and that perfect distance is remarkable because it allows there to be a perfect symbiosis between the sun and the earth to be able to allow life to be able to grow and flourish. And that's actually what they try to do every so often. You see, like, it seems like once a year, you'll see on the news, we found another planet that possibly supports life. So the reason why it has to support life is that it has to be in perfect proximity to a sun in order for the sun to be able to provide it with life. And of course, they don't have any proof of anything. All they say is that there's a possibility that, given the relationship between the sun and us, this could be a similar Earth-type planet. And that's what they say. Of course, they haven't found any. Not that Judaism doesn't allow the possibility for life outside of Earth, but I just find it a preoccupation that's quite humorous and somewhat pointless. But that's okay. And that's me personally. So the idea that the sun has a shield, it has something to be able to block us from receiving that radioactivity. We're going to describe it in a specific way. And I'm not a scientist. I don't pretend to be a scientist, but I'll try to explain to you the way that I understood it. And of course, if anybody understands it differently, I'd love to hear from you. So the Rebbe explains that so Havai Yud Kei Vav Kei and Elokim likewise work in that kind of way. Yud Kei Vav Kei, as we've explained in a previous mimer, is too intense for us to be able to handle. So Elokim creates that shield through this element of distance in a similar way that you have the sun and the quote-unquote shield. And that way we're able to receive from Yud Kei Vav Kei as well, because we can't receive from it directly because that's too, so to speak, spiritually radioactive conceptually. So the Rebbe says, the simple meaning is that the sun needs a shield to protect creatures on earth. In other words, there are two separate elements, the body of the sun itself and the sun's orbit, creates the protection that we noted. Okay, so the term that the Rebbe uses in the Maimer is that this is the Galgal Hashemesh. The Galgal is of course means a wheel, it's an orbit or the cycle of this sun. And I'm not sure exactly what that reference is. I'm not sure exactly how that applies into the physical aspects of the earth. The way I understand it is that there's the cycle of course, day and night, and there's the cycle of winter, spring, summer, and fall, and all of those cycles, of course, impact the world and how the world as we know it. The point of the matter is that, again, there isn't this continuous and total straight radiation from the sun, because if we were to receive that radiation on a constant basis, of course, it would be very, very dangerous. And of course, we know just simply in terms of skin cancer, just that concept of spending too much time in the sun, directly receiving from the sun, that itself is dangerous. So we understand that idea. Now, again, how that is fully applicable into the physical manifestation. I'm not a scientist, so I don't want to go there. But I think the idea we can understand that the sun itself, the body of the sun, has a tremendous intensity, and there is an idea of a conceptual shield, which itself gives us that distance or some kind of minimizing of that radiation in order for us to be able to receive the goodness of the sun and not the negativity. Okay? So this second element of the sun is that which was referred to as Chama. So the first element we'll talk about Shemesh. The Shemesh is the actual body of the sun, but the second element is the Chama, is the heat, the radiation. Now we say that the nations are Ovdei Chama. They serve, they're idol worshippers, and we specifically use the term Chama once again. They serve the heat. The nations worship the sun, meaning the Chama, the heat of the sun. And that's very, very, very important. And we're going to see why. But let's continue. This verse also clarifies the spiritual root of the difference between the Jewish people and the nations of the world. The Jewish people are rooted in the divine name Havaya, Yud-Kei-Vav-Kei, and the nations find their source in the divine name Elohim. Primary focus on either of the two names represents a very different angle towards life. And that's where we're going. If you're focusing on Yud-Kei-Vav-Kei, then you're not limited by nature. And the recognition that there's something beyond you is quite natural and is quite part of how you see the world and how you perceive the world and how you exist. On the other end, of course, focusing on the Chama is focusing on nature itself, focusing on that which is within creation, and not just within creation, as we're going to see it's a corollary effect as opposed to the essence. And that's very, very, very important and very profound in terms of understanding. But again, we're going to explore this soon. First, the Rebbe says, let's understand how these two names interact with each other. The name Elohim, Menachem, please bring me the battery, the plug. The name Elohim serves as a shield over God's name Havaya, just as the sun's shield protects the earth from the intensity of the sun. This occurs through the system of Orot and Kelim, the flow of divine light and its investment into spiritual vessels. Havaya is the source for the Orot, and Elohim is the source of the Kelim. The Kelim conceal the light that becomes invested into them. So let's go back to this idea that we had started discussing in the Maimar Lotia Meshakela. We discussed that actually the way the relationship between us and God works in such a way of Orot and Kelim. Orot is the lights or the energy of God, and it needs to be absorbed into something. It cannot just exist on it. It cannot exist within our parameters without having something to be able to hold on to. And this we explained is similar to, for example, electricity. Electricity by itself is a power like any other power. But until you plug something into the grid and funnel that electricity into something specific, it just is a general energy. It doesn't have any specific parameters. Then afterwards, once you channel it into something, that's when you can see the results of the electricity. And now I have a light that works. Now I have a computer that works. Now I have, whatever it is else that I'm trying to accomplish. So the energy itself is beyond, but it needs to have a vessel or some kind of limiting factor in order for it to be focused into something, in order to be able to have a practical use, some kind of practical application. Lightning has tremendous energy, but we can't tap into it. And so therefore it just dissipates and that's it. It's gone. So the orot come from Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. Yud-Kei Vav-Kei is beyond the world. It's beyond all of creation. And it has tremendous intensity. That needs to be fed into the world, and it does through the divine name Elohim. And the divine name Elohim is the source for the kelim, the vessels, the receptacle for the light, for the energy. So the way for us to be able to receive is through the receptacles. The receptacles, of course, they limit. That's their nature. That's what they do. They create a shape, so to speak, around the energy. They give it its color. They give it its directional flow, and all of those things. Any parameter that you can think of is how the kelim handle handle the light. And that comes from Elohim. So the Rebbe continues, the essence of the light cannot be expressed through revelation. The intensity of its raw state is above revelation. We appreciate light in our universe, in our world, because of the fact that the light is so distant from the sun. Because of the fact that it has been minimized because of its travel, and because of the fact that the expression is not focused, it's not intense. That's how we can appreciate the light of the sun. But of course, the closer we go to the sun, the more it's impossible to be able to even call it light. Because light, the way we know it, is the capacity to be able to see and experience things. Now, there is light on the sun, but that light is so intense that it's above revelation. It's not about revealing things. It's not about seeing things. It is encapsulated in its original source. And we simply cannot experience light on that level. It's not possible. It therefore, the Rebbe continues, it therefore takes the concealing properties of the kelim to allow the orot to be revealed. The only way for the orot to be able to be revealed is through concealment. So, of course, this is very profound because it has so many different aspects of life. You know, we've discussed it briefly in the past, but when you think about struggle opens up new capacities. If a person lives an entire life without struggle, then a person cannot truly reveal who they are within. Darkness and these limiting properties are for the purpose of revelation. And that revelation cannot happen without this concealment. So these ideas give us a whole different reflection on what we see as darkness, as what we see as concealment of godliness. That doesn't mean that we enjoy it. That doesn't mean that it's something that is what we want. We don't want those things. We don't want concealment. We do want revelation. But ultimately, God understands the system in order for us to be able to receive properly. And so he gives us certain things, and some of them are beyond our capacity of truly understanding why he gave that amount of concealment. Nobody's going to say that God forbid that there's a logical reason to something as horrifying as the Holocaust or anything like that. But there's no question that the concealment creates certain things within ourselves. The ultimate picture we can't understand, but elements of it we can. And I want to focus, I want to point out that those elements are fractional. We only understand a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of it. And of course, God is being infinite. God truly understands. And when Mashiach comes, we'll be able to perceive, not just in a rational, logical, systematic way, but in a way beyond rationale, beyond logic. We'll be able to be given access into that. And this is somewhat similar, this is a little bit of a digression, but this is somewhat similar to the true arts. When you come across something that is truly artistic, as soon as you start to explain it, it loses its magnitude. Something is truly great if, in terms of the arts, whether it's music or whether it's whatever type of art that it could be. There's an element that you can describe, but if that's all that it is, this small element of description of logical flow, and that's all it is, then okay, that's not the greatest of art. The greatest of art can bring a person to a sense of awe that's beyond themselves. And if you ask them to describe this, the answer would be, it's really beyond description. So,
Rabbi,
yes.
Are you saying that sunlight, that the sun is so bright that it's beyond our ability to see it, and that maybe is connected with Hashem? You're saying is that it's not for us to see. In other words, it's been the kelim that we're supposed to be the receptacles here on earth. We receive the light, so we're supposed to be that Hashem intends us to be the kelim to receive it here on earth, but not that close to the sun. In other words,
well, we are not the kelim. We can create kelim in order to be able to receive that light properly. And God has kelim that he has created. So that, I guess it depends on what reference we're talking about. That's the honest truth. To some degree, we can be vessels to that energy, but not in this reference. In this reference, we're talking about let's give a very specific example. Chesed is one of the kelim through which Hashem created the world.
The sphirot, in other words,
Chesed.
you're talking about the levels of sphirot, in other words.
So when you talk about chesed as it is by itself, it's just the description of a particular manifestation of a person's personality. Or as God creates the world in a particular direction, in a particular element that is similar to the way we interact in a way of chesed. Okay?
I see.
We need to be able to in a focused manner, because if we don't receive it in that kind of specific manner, then it's too intense for us. We can't receive infinity. We can't deal with infinity. We have to be able to differentiate and to be able to limit our experiences and in order to be able to receive even from God. So when you're receiving in a chesed way, it's specifically in a chesed way, and when you're receiving in a gvura way, it's specifically in a gvura way. Beyond that is literally beyond our capacity of understanding. It's beyond our capacity to be able to receive. Does that make a little bit more sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay. So it is therefore understood, the Rebbe continues, that the Kalim in the name of Elohim are all about concealment, even if this concealment is for the purpose of revelation afterwards. So we need to understand this idea. The fact is that there is concealment going on. There is darkness as a result of what's going on because we're hiding elements of godliness. But we understand that darkness and that concealment is for something greater. It's for a greater receipt. It's for the capability of being able to receive. So we don't look at the concealment as concealment in and of itself. We don't look at the darkness as darkness in and of itself. We recognize that God is giving us in a specific way for us to be able to receive, and it happens to be through this system. And the Rebbe continues and says this same idea is reflected in a different element of Hishalshut. So the Rebbe says we see the same theme with another element of Hishalshut. The external facet of the Kalim creates the Parasaurus. Parasaurus means the curtains that separate between each of the four worlds. So between each one of the worlds, if you can imagine, if you have a flashlight and you put the flashlight on your hand, most of the light does not go through, and a very tiny amount can diffuse through your skin. And so the same thing with regards to between each world, the Kabbalah describes that the minimal light that goes through a system of curtains, which is an even greater concealment and diffusion of the light. These curtains exhibit even greater concealment than the Kalim. While the Kalim conceal the light, at least they do so for the purpose of the light being revealed through them. Again, God gives us through chesed, so the energy is focused into the Keli of chesed, and then afterwards it's clear that we're receiving chesed. But through the Parasaot, everything becomes diffused, and you cannot see specifically what's chesed and what's gvura. We cannot oftentimes perceive exactly what's going on in terms of how we're receiving, what we're getting from God at a particular time, and certainly not understand why. But the parsa between Atzilut and Bria completely blocks the light to the extent that as a result, self-aware and separate entities are created in Bria and lower. This diffusion of the light creates a distance to the original source, and you don't see the direct distance to the original source. And as a result of that, you have self-aware creatures. They feel their own existence. However, the Rebbe says still, the theme is the same as with the Kalim. Even this much thicker concealment is ultimately for the purpose of revelation. For without the Parsa, the light of Atzilut could never be absorbed into Bria, Yitzir, and Asiya. It would be too intense. And these lower worlds would not be able to absorb and appreciate the light as it is. Even after being blocked by the Kalim, even after going through the process of the Tzimtzum, it's only through a further degradation of the light that we're able to get it through. So it's important to be able to recognize this idea. There is God's ultimate flow, God's ultimate interest in the relationship, God's ultimate interest in revelation for us to be able to receive and all that kind of thing. From God's perspective, from God's own self, we cannot exist because we feel our own separate existence. We cannot exist to be able to experience infinity, because we are very linear and limited human beings. So in anything that God gives us needs to be specifically focused in a particular manner, and that focus blocks off. It conceals light. It conceals energy. We can't receive it all. And those concealments themselves, we have to recognize that is for us to be able to receive. Every level of concealment, God, why are you hiding your face from me? It is for the capability of being able to receive in a particular way. And so the Rebbe continues and says, in summary, the Kelim and Parsaot are both extensions of the name Elohim, and its main constitution is that of concealment. Notwithstanding the fact that this concealment is for a greater good, in other words, in order for the lower creatures to be created and for them to be able to absorb godliness in their state of separateness, still, as things descend lower and even lower, eventually this concealment gives way to the point that some are even able to idolize the sun. So what this means is basically, as you create, sorry, I'm trying to get, come on. I had to admit somebody into here, but my iPad over here is not quite functioning the way it should be. Hold on a second. There we go. Come on. There we go. Sorry, the touch sensitivity seems to be very lacking on this iPad. As further and further creatures are created, there is greater and greater concealment. With the greater and greater concealment comes a lack of understanding where things come from. So with that lack of understanding, people cease to understand who we are, what we're doing, and to be able to give give God credit for what we're receiving. So therefore, people have developed the capacity of thinking that the sun is their source of life. That they see nature and they see, okay, that's the reason why I'm living, because of the natural effect of things. And they can become sun worshippers. They can look around at themselves and say, okay, what is the greatest power here? What do I get my life from? What do I get my sustenance from? And their answer would be, on a very simplistic level, would be the sun. I said, that is the result of this greater and greater and greater concealment, which is for the purpose of creating creatures that are self-aware and can make their own decisions. The concealment, though we understand, is for us to be able to receive godliness in our current state and not for us to make that mistake. And the Rebbe continues and says, we explained earlier that what this means is that the nations get distracted. They focus on the orbit of the sun, or the cycle of the sun, so to speak, the heat, instead of the actual source, the sun itself. What that means is they confuse the external results for the essence. They conflate the results and they don't realize what the essential source of the results are. They're focused on what they receive. What they feel is they feel the heat. And so that's what they idolize. But they don't realize that that heat is coming from a source. And we have to be cognizant of the original source, not just the effects. And the reason why they make this mistake is because the source of their souls comes from the divine name Elohim. They therefore do not feel that the purpose of concealment is for revelation. They only feel the concealment itself. They therefore make the philosophical mistake thinking that God abandoned the universe, leaving it to the astrological systems to direct things or whatever it is. They therefore think that it would demean God to say that his presence is involved with the world, and it makes more sense to serve those who they think God placed in charge of the universe. In other words, they basically say, let's serve the sun. God exists. Yes, God is somewhere, an old man with a long beard, sitting on his throne somewhere in heaven, and he created a sun. Now the sun's watching over things. The moon is watching over things. So let's serve the sun and the moon, or whatever natural systems we want, because those are the things that I receive from. And this is actually the logic behind, all pagan worship. It's not illogical. It's very logical and it's very systematic. But it's not cognizant of there's an original source. And the reason why they don't come up with that, they don't recognize that, is because that's not where their souls come from. Their souls come from the name Elohim, which is all about concealment. But we understand, because we have to look deeper into things, we have to realize that the concealment is for a revelation. It's not just for concealment in and of itself. So that's their mistake. Their mistake is that God is somewhere way beyond. God abandoned his world. He's not here. And in fact, this is actually part of the Christian model, is that a person needs to serve Jesus instead of God. And it was just an extension of the pagan ideas. Basically, God is somewhere way above, our capacity of being able to handle. And so therefore you need an intermediary who we serve instead of God. And that's how, he'll basically do everything to us. God wants us to do all these things. We can't, we sin. And so therefore, basically, we're screwed. And the only way to be able to do it is, God forbid, through cheese and crackers. There are so many holes in this theory. It's not even worth it to go into all of them right now, because that's not the purpose of this. But we recognize this whole idea is flawed. We recognize that it's flawed because of the fact that anything has an original source. And it's not about the results. It's not about the tertiary effects. It's about going to the source. And what's fascinating is that this is actually such a Jewish way of looking at things. You look at Jews and you see, why are the Jews always revolutionaries in every field? Because Jews always try to go back to the original source, try to get down to the deepest level of things, and are not willing just to accept it as, okay, this is the way we've done things, and this is the way we've always done things. Tevye and Fiddler in the Roof is the exact opposite of what Judaism actually is, and is the exact opposite of the way a Jew thinks. Tradition, why do we do it? I don't know. Basically, that's why we've always done it. That is absolutely not the way that Judaism works, and that's absolutely not the way Jews think. We always try to get back to the source, and it's remarkable. You look at even in terms of being in the U.S. military. You look at some of the most influential figures in Western warfare are Jews, and they simply did not accept the way things had been done before. Many of them were, of course, not only not observant Jews, but extremely secular. Some of them even may have converted to other religions for whatever reason. but their attitudes and their approaches were purely Jewish, that they were not willing to accept. They had to challenge things to be able to go into, to be able to really see, all right, what needs to be accomplished and how are we going to accomplish it? And that's because our souls come from a much higher place. We are a more complex people. We are a struggling people because we're always trying to get to that essence. Now the Rebbe basically explains why it's illogical to say that God abandoned the earth. He says their mistake is obvious. If God has some relevance to the heavens, then he has equal relevance to the earth. So it doesn't make sense to say that God is up there somewhere, because God is infinite. And so he has absolutely the same relationship with heaven and earth in terms of their relevance to himself. The fact that the earth receives its sustenance through the heavens is proof that there is relativity between them, in other words, between the heaven and the earth, despite the earth's minute size in comparison. So just as God lowers himself to deal with the heavens, it is utterly the same, just that he lowers himself to deal with the earth. For the one who has utterly no limitation, all limits are equal. So it is therefore illogical to say that God is totally above and cannot deal with the world. The Christian idea that basically you need to be able to work through this particular guy is something that doesn't make any sense. It does not fit in with the concept of God. And I had a conversation with, when I was younger and far more bored. We had just one child, maybe two children at the time. A Shabbat in Seattle during the summer, so there were no students hanging around. Everybody was out, and two missionaries showed up on my door, and I thought, oh, yay, playtime. And we started talking. At some point, they said something about, what if God was standing here in front of you? I said, does God have legs? They said, what do you mean? I said, you're saying that God is standing. And they said, yes. I said, in that case, the God that you're worshiping is not the same that I'm worshiping. And, basically the difference between us is that you are worshiping a human being that happens to be very, 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 very tall. I am worshiping God. And so therefore, we can't even have a conversation here. Their doctrine is stuck within that human frame of reference. And what we're saying here is, again, to quote this quote here, for the one who has utterly no limitations, all limits, no matter what they are, no matter how big they are, no matter how small they are, they're equal. So the same way that God can be working through the heavens, God can also be working through the earth. And there's no advantage or limitation between one way or the other. The Rebbe concludes this chapter and says, but the truth is that God watches over all of creation, and particularly over the Jewish people, his nation, over which his divine providence is recognizable and obvious. And it is only because of the focus on the external shield that the mistake is made to say that God has abandoned the world. But this mistake leads one to express intense passion, excitement, and heat towards all unholy pleasures of the world instead of towards all things godly. So the result of somebody thinking that God is distant makes one focus on themselves, makes one focus totally on their own feelings and pleasures and to the absence of anything else. And that is the result of having a quote-unquote distant God. That's a result of the concept of Ovdei Achama. So the hedonism, thank you. The Greek hedonism went hand in hand with their philosophy and their paganism, and of course, every one of their idols were a representation, meant to be some kind of representation of some kind of physical or natural system. And again, they were logicals. They wanted everything. I'm not a Greek scholar, but the way I understand it, at least, is they said everything has its lines. There's a God of love, there's a God of war, and everything has its own specifics. They couldn't get to this concept of infinity. They couldn't absorb the idea. They couldn't think that they couldn't understand that the same God that commands war also commands loving your fellow man. They couldn't comprehend that. And I said, that's illogical. It doesn't make sense. It's much more sensible to be able to have everything in very neat little lines. It's much more sensible to say that God's completely out of this world. Because God's, spiritual and beyond. How could God care about or be interested in dealing with? That's not logical. That's correct. It's not logical. But God is not limited to logic. It's not part of the system. Even though my iPad is plugged in, it's still losing charge, and that's frustrating. Now we should have about 15 minutes left. So before we take this one step, and so that logic, though, leads us to the point where we're not basically responsible for anything. And the question is instead, how do I fill my life with something that I want? So therefore I choose. This is the brilliance of paganism, is basically you can choose your God whenever you feel like. You choose the God of love when you want love. You choose the God of war when you want war. It's not one ultimate responsibility. It's, all right, who are we serving today? It's very systematic, but of course it leads you into a situation where there's nothing but focus on what you want yourself. It leads a person into nothing but physical passion, physical desires, physical pleasure, nothing but the focus on oneself. At a certain point, that's where it goes to. Idolatry's original idea, as described by the Rambam, was that, we should thank the sun. We should appreciate it. We should, God uses the sun as a mechanism through which we receive life. And so therefore we should thank the sun. We should thank the ocean. We should thank the clouds, whatever it is, whatever the gods that they created were, they're mechanisms through which God created. But the mistake that they made, as the Rambam writes, is that it's like thanking the axe in the hands of the wood chopper. The axe didn't do anything, because the axe is just a tool through which the wood chopper chops the wood. You thank the wood chopper, you don't thank the axe. It's quite a chutzpah to turn around to the person who pours you water and ignore the person and turn to the pitcher and say, thank you very much for pouring me water. But that's basically the difference in philosophy between the Greek approach, very much the Western approach, and the Jewish approach. And this leads to all sorts of other elements. So before we go any further, I just want to make sure that this is clear so far. Do we have any questions so far? Is this frozen? It is now unfrozen.
No, everything's working.
Okay. You guys heard me until now, right?
Yep, no problem.
Good. All right. So chapter 4. So there another Rebbe brings it into a very practical reflection for ourselves. The idea of bowing down. Why is there the concept of bowing? Where does it come from? So the spiritual idea of bowing is that you are lowering your intellect downwards. You are paying homage to whoever you're bowing to by recognizing that your head, the highest of your faculties, is lower than the person in front of you. That's the idea. And so the idea of bowing to the sun and the constellations is something that's also similar to that. And that's what the Rebbe says in chapter 4. But it's something very applicable to us. The idea of bowing to the sun and constellations is very much applicable to us. Just as one physically prostrates himself, he lowers his head in obeisance. I think that's how you pronounce the word. Likewise, some people have total and absolute intellectual investment into their livelihood. And here's the caveat. But this is truthfully the same thing as bowing to the Chama. Just as bowing to the sun demonstrated the mistaken thought that it is the sun that is providing sustenance to the recipients, likewise, one who subjugates his own mind and thoughts only to his livelihood, thinking that it is only what he does, which gives him sustenance, is forgetting that it is God who provides us with everything we need. Our efforts and our job and livelihood is only a vessel through which to channel God's blessings. But when someone overthinks or overplays the value of his own involvement and effort in his livelihood, this drags him downward towards worldly pleasures and desires. So this is basically, it's a reframing of who we are and what we're doing. When a person looks at their job and whoever they are and whatever they do, as look at me, look at what I'm capable of doing. I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I'm a professional, I've owned a construction building, I have real estate, whatever the job might be. And they look at their success or failures as purely a result of themselves and their talent and their capabilities. The immediate line is that the result is life is all about me.
Rabbi,
And when that, yes,
it almost becomes like a Vodazora, in other words, the idea of
that's
making that a categorical imperative, as they say in existentialism, setting their everything in one basket. In other words, I'll put all their eggs in one basket for a profession or whatever it might be. They become all becomes like a Vodazora.
exactly what we're saying. That's exactly what we're saying.
Yeah.
And the result of that is, of course, that basically becomes all about me, and whatever elements of life is all about me, and ends up being our own passion, our own desires, our own pleasures, and all of that is ultimately just self-destructive. And again, nobody's saying that you can't have passions and excitement in the world, but the question is, what's driving you? And the question is, what are the systems running behind you? And the question is, of course, when things go wrong, what happens to you as well? On the other hand, when you look at your livelihood as a method through which God gives you the capability of interacting with the world, a method through which God gives you the capacity of receiving God's blessings, that humility gives you the ability to do all sorts of other things, to be charitable, to be focused on your clients in such a way that they feel invigorated by you and touched by you and moved by you, and therefore they're lifted to a higher level. It allows you that humility to be able to make decisions that are not self-focused, they're outside of oneself. It's focused on everybody else. And so the Rebbe says the way to avoid this attitude of complete self-focus and this attitude of idolatry towards their livelihood and what they do is for a person to have a contrite spirit and recognize his own low spiritual station. He should say to himself, who am I to deserve even what I have? Look at me, I've become distant from godliness and thereby sullied by foreign desires. If I would only serve God properly, I would consider myself deserving. But since I do know deep in my soul that things are not quite the way they should be, how can I possibly think that I deserve more? And the result of that kind of humility allows a person to be able to appreciate what they have. There's no element of looking and saying, okay, I need this, I need the other thing, I need something more. The I need more is, of course, a destructive tendency because it's never enough. It's always more exciting in the showroom than it is actually having it. That's a fact. The joke about the boat owner, the two best days in a boat owner's life is the day he buys the boat and the day he sells the boat. That's the reality of things. Doesn't mean that this person shouldn't have a boat. It doesn't mean, but the question is, what exactly do you need? One of the most remarkable books I've read is a book called Mine's Bigger. And it tells of the competition between, and I'm forgetting who was who in this whole thing, but to be able to create the world's biggest sailboat. And the winner of these two ultra wealthy guys from Silicon Valley, and this is purely just an ego trip, but this guy built the Maltese Falcon. The Maltese Falcon is a ship that I believe it's at its height is somewhere around 280 feet tall. And the reason why they made it only that tall is because of the fact that any taller, it would not have been able to go underneath the Golden Gate Bridge. And so this book is this incredible description of what these two wealthy guys did in order to be able to show the other guy that I'm bigger than you and I'm better than you. And this complete and absolute stupidity, spending hundreds of millions of dollars in a preschool fight. Hundreds of millions of dollars in a fight that was so absolutely pointless that after they finished the Maltese Falcon with its marble and gold inlays and forget about it's the only ship in the world to have sails that are controlled by computers, etc. Within a year, it was up for sale. And when, of course, it was sold, it was not sold for the $300+ million that it was built with, but a fraction of that. Because this guy had completely and absolutely lost sight of what is true and normal and sane. And so therefore, he went down to the maturity of a preschooler. And that's just the way it is. And that's the way these people work. And it's really remarkable to think about that and to meet people that talk about this and talk about mine's bigger, because they totally lose sight of the purpose. They totally see nothing but the heat and pleasure of the world. They do not look at the source. They don't look at the essence. They don't look at the why did God give this to me? This is something that I need to appreciate. This is something that I need to realize that I'm not even deserving of the blessings that I have. And therefore, I need to do a better job in my world. Therefore, I need to be, even more focused on my purpose, not the job through which I got the money because I'm so brilliant, but the purpose of my life. Right now, I didn't read the article, but my wife sent it to me the other day. Madonna's dog is selling her mansion in Miami. I can't remember what the selling price is. Something like $100 million or something like that. The dog owns the house. This is literal insanity. And where's it coming from? It comes from people who've completely and absolutely lost the plot. All they see is physical pleasure, and it brings them down to incredible, incredible stupidity. It brings them to very, very deep levels of corruption, internal as well as external. So the Rebbe then quotes from what he called, just to finish this chapter. Oh boy, we're not going to be able to finish it today. That's fine. The brokenheartedness expressed in this type of self-reflection is itself a vessel for God's blessings, because only an empty vessel can absorb content, as you remember from previous Bible. A full vessel cannot. Of course, all Jews are worthy of receiving blessings by themselves, but nevertheless, one must still work to instill in oneself this type of humility. In a practical sense, this causes one to negate the focus on pleasure as an end to itself. The person should do whatever he needs to do for his physical health in order to serve God properly, whether eating, drinking, or any of his other bodily needs. But the pleasure resulting from these things is not something the body needs to remain healthy. Therefore, a person should work on himself to avoid lusting after worldly pleasures, and as a result of this, he will then be an empty vessel and be capable of receiving God's blessings. Thoughts? Any thoughts? We're good?
Yes, we're good.
Okay. All right, everybody. God willing, we will. My plan is to finish this before Hanukkah, which God willing we should be able to do. But I want to wish everybody a wonderful, wonderful Shabbos. Hope that was a lot. Oh, there we go. Madonna's. Thank you. Madonna's dog Gunther is selling. Go ahead. What was that?
31.7 million.
Quote there. Sorry, I was off by a couple $1 million.
A million here, a million there.
Just a factor of three. Not a
Right.
big
For some people, it's pocket change.
It's unbelievable. And these same people have the chutzpah to complain about poor people and wherever it is. She'll talk about it. She'll talk the talk. She'll say, oh yeah, absolutely. There needs to be more, people need to be doing more for poor people in Ghana or whatever it is. She'll say it. But you see when something like this is going on, you see what's really going on. Complete and absolute loss of the capacity. So this logical thinking leads to complete insanity. So have a wonderful, wonderful Shabbos. We will continue.
Hi, Gesund,
God
everybody.
Thank you.